welcome everybody. My name is Ben Kowalski, and this is Carl, Carl Bonebright, the Assistant VP of the Troth. We are here with Althing Considered. How you doing, Carl?
Keeping busy. How about yourself?
Oh, we just got done with the Interfaith Committee's special meeting on cultural appropriation and spiritual genocide, hosted by Shane Orthman, Daughters and Sons of Ita, and Sheldon Knoll, who is an indigenous teacher, pipe carrier, practitioner. It was a really good conversation. It did not go where I thought it would. When you have conversations about cultural appropriation, you think that it's going to just be a list of examples of all the different things that we pagans are doing wrong. Yeah, yeah, right. Like all you'll hear about the smudging, the using of different bones and animal skins, tails, and other
Dream
kinds of stuff.
catchers.
Dream catchers. You'd think that would be the entire 2 hours, because you could literally go on, but it wasn't. It ended up being about how we show up in solidarity with indigenous peoples, how we go from merely doing land acknowledgements to actually talking about how we restore native sovereignty, and how we join our voices with theirs politically, to help re-enfranchise and restore their identity.
So some deeds.
Yeah, maybe some deeds. Well, yeah, actually, it's funny that you should say that, because he did say, when I asked him, he kind of took me aback, because I was talking about the land acknowledgement, and I said, "What do you think that we should do instead of these things?" And he said, "Give me the deed to your house. Like, you got a deed for your house? Give me the deed to your house. Sign it over to me. I'm gonna do right by it." He's like, "I don't see, unless you're talking land back." Unless you're talking actual land back, as in giving me the deed to your house, what good is your acknowledgement going to do me?
Yeah.
Right? What good is the acknowledgement going to do if you acknowledge all these things happened and you don't turn over your property deed, right, to me, and sign it over to me? Then what good are your words worth? Deeds, literally, not words, right?
Yeah. It's
Deed.
a fun word played.
Yes, but it also had to do with things like, how do we do restoration or reparation
Yeah.
to land? And we were even talking about things like, what about a land tax on every piece of property sold that would go to restoring Native American land rights, and go to, like, even a sovereign wealth fund
Yeah.
for them. But these were all things that all get discussed in the Interfaith Committee, which was an open meeting for anybody, by the
Yeah.
way. We always have open meetings in the Interfaith Committee. We still have yet to have our fourth quarter meeting, which will be getting scheduled shortly. Oh, Carl, I talked a lot. What have you been doing tonight?
I mean, tonight, I got married last weekend, so
Whoa!
busy.
Big
Busy.
news.
Yeah. So I went from single parent of two preteens to co-parent of two preteens and two preschoolers. So
Oh,
full busy
wow.
house.
So you're like, yeah, and congratulations, Carl. Congratulations from, I'm assuming, everybody who's watching. Uh, you were talking a lot about this, anticipating this coming up, and I was so excited
Yeah.
to see it actually get pulled off, and I'm so happy for you, buddy.
It was a really good ceremony, and a lot of good folks came out. So
Awesome. And we are right now, and it was right in the middle of the holy tide of winter nights, which we are in right now.
yep.
We're still, you can tell from the decorations that we have all around our faces. It is now within the holy tide of winter nights. That's the holy tide between the full moon following it's the first or second full moon following the autumn equinox, to the next new moon. So we're still partying. Halloween was just a few days ago. Halloween's not necessarily a heathen holiday, but I know a lot of people who incorporate it. I don't know, Carl, do you incorporate Halloween into your practice at all?
I have in the past, but when you're wrangling 4 kids through the trick-or-treating gauntlet, it's a little harder to do. But yeah, we did actually we planned the wedding for the full moon right at the start. So you know, maybe in a few years when things settle down, we'll try and work it back in. But Halloween, I have a pagan friend who's not necessarily heathen, but she spoke online the other day that she celebrates Halloween as Halloween, and then has the rest of the holy days later, celebrating the actual Hallows Eve. I think November 6th is the original date, and so, like you said, the holy tide, stretching it out after the full moon into the new moon, like that gives us plenty of time to work with. And 20th century time with the 9 to 5 grind, clock in, clock out, trying to celebrate something like a harvest time or even celestial holy time based on moon patterns, etc. You get a lot more leeway than really anyone wants to admit. I mean, it's an anathema to this modern lockstep that we've come to just kind of accept as a fact of life.
Right. That holidays are on certain days.
Yeah.
That there is a number of a day, except for Easter, I guess. But like most holidays have a specific date, and it is hard. It's one of those early damn it's of heathenry where someone just goes, "Oh, damn it, I missed another holiday."
Did you?
And
There's time.
I didn't. I did. I never miss another holiday with the Troth online calendar. Never miss another holiday by subscribing at thetroth.org to the Holy Apostolic Universal Troth calendar.
Nice Truman Show insert there. That was very subtle. I like it.
We were, it was definitely, it was a work from Ben Wagon. A lot of Ben Waggoner's research went into building it. So you can, if you're heathen out there and you don't really know what you're doing, which a lot of us were in the same spot, and you just want something to build off of, this is about as good as you're going to get. Just as something easy. So troth.org, thing on holidays. You've probably been there already. There's just a Google Calendar. Just subscribe to it and build off that if you want to.
Exactly.
So yeah, as far as Halloween goes, yeah, it falls within that holy tide. So I feel I don't, I have my alpha bloat to start winter nights, and then Halloween comes in as just this kind of little fun thing that we do. I don't know. It's changed my view of Halloween. I don't know about you, but my view of Halloween has changed as I've gotten older, where I've started to now see it as a way of watching kids grow up in a way. Because if you think about it, if you're in your house, you're giving candy out to these kids. It's the same kids every year who are coming back, and they have one costume this year and another costume the next year, and it's a little sad sometimes because you go, there's going to be a time when they're not going to come back in their costume. They're going to be too old for it. They're going to say, this is my last year. I'm going to be giving I'm always going to be someone's last Halloween, right? Someone's last trick or treating is going to be with me. And you watch these kids grow up. It's a really kind of beautiful ceremony that we do every year, where every neighborhood gets introduced to the neighborhood kids. Or at least in theory, that's how it goes. I don't know if you guys live in a kind of neighborhood like that, but not everyone gets to. But when you do, and you get to see, this year it's Garfield, next year it's Ninja Turtles, next year it's Popples. I'm dating myself.
If you get the other way around.
Sorry.
No, but yeah, I mean, it's almost a community rite of passage.
Yes.
Watching those costumes change and the interests, and like you said, being someone's last Halloween, giving out the candy, and then the transition to not necessarily adulthood, but there is a passing of the torch as they become the candy giver as opposed to the receiver.
Yeah. or they go to the Halloween parties, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to going out and trick or treating. And it also just amused me that when you start going out trick or treating, go with your parents. They're holding your hand, right? There's always a parent nearby. And as you get older, it's just you and your friends, and then no more.
Yep.
Then you're off to the party. So yeah, you get to watch someone's childhood, which is pretty crazy.
And if you really think about it, like, there isn't really an equivalent event or cultural ceremony. I mean, if you want to use that term, in current America, at least, or at least the West, where you have that kind of almost universal acceptance and participation.
Yeah. Yes. You sometimes have it with, with the Christmas time, the caroling, the things like that, but it's not as
But
you
that,
put
again,
it.
that's still centered around a religious. This is almost a
Yes.
secular thing, because
Yes.
the caroling, you're not going to do that with your work group unless you
Right.
work at a religious organization. But
Mm-hmm.
the Halloween party, that's something everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
And Easter, you take that time off because Christian domination of Western society. But the numbers don't lie. The trends of people transitioning to and from, and more from than to,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same. There's
No.
no, and it's simply a celebration of,
It's a celebration of childhood, isn't it?
yeah. You can say that. You can be the cynic and say the uh, capitalist exploitation of uh,
Invented by
sweets,
candy
and
companies.
yeah,
But
the created by the
and
candy companies. What's
dentists.
that line from the first Hocus Pocus?
Mm-hmm.
But even something like the 4th of July, um, which is arguably very secular, but it's also jingoistic. It's centered
Mm-hmm.
around, or um, any other national holiday of that kind of prominence. Halloween stands alone
Mm-hmm.
comparatively.
Also, in the way that kids get to express themselves and say what matters to them, right? I was just
Yeah.
thinking about this too. Like the costume that
Don't you
I
have any
go as,
Reese's?
no, or just the costume that I go as is something that I really love, right?
Yeah.
When I'm
Yeah.
a kid, it's a catalog of things that I love. Like when my first costume that I remember I had for Halloween was masks. Do you guys remember masks where it was like they had the cars?
Oh yeah.
And
Oh,
the
Matt. Yeah, Mask.
masks. Mask.
MASK, where
Yeah,
like it
mask.
was all an
MASK. That's right.
abbreviation. Yeah, because that was
Not PJ Masks.
no,
That's new
no, that's something
school,
else
guys.
entirely.
That's new. This is
Which
Mask.
vehicle was your
MASK.
favorite? Was it
Or
the
was it no? It was Centurions. Centurions.
Centurions? Yes, I remember that one
Yes.
too. Yeah,
Oh boy.
even older.
it's, it's now it's now time to register with
Power
the
Extreme.
AARP. Just schedule your prostate exam.
Yep. Yep.
Which everyone get your screening, please. We have a message here from Daniel saying here we have had trick or treat go from hundreds of kids to under 20 from a lot of churches trunk or treats. Yeah. Daniel, I've noticed
they're
that
trying to
too.
steal it away.
Well, yeah.
Harvest festivals.
Yeah. I've seen that too. I think that some of it's like for us in Minnesota. I don't know if you're in Minnesota. That certainly that's what happened to us. It was a concern that it was going to be too cold on Halloween to actually do some trick or treating. It was actually it was like 28 degrees.
Oh
Right
wow.
here. Yeah. Hello,
like,
Alabama.
Oh, well, two days before Halloween, it dropped probably 40 degrees, and
yeah,
we were low 50s, upper 40s that
yeah.
night. So it was chilly, but
it's
comparatively.
I mean, my daughter and I definitely went out and trick or treated and stuff, but it was shorter.
Oh.
And yeah, there was a lot fewer kids and a lot more candy. People were just dumping candy.
Well, they were trying to get rid of it because there were fewer kids.
Getting rid of it, right?
Yeah. No, we had a ton of kids in my neighborhood. I'm in a nice tight little subdivision where there's a lot of houses, upper middle class, I admit. So my kids made out like bandits, and all we did was like 2 cul-de-sacs. We didn't even hit the whole neighborhood. It was crazy. But no, one of my earliest memories was the blizzard of like 90 or 92 hit Halloween. The snow was like 4 feet deep.
Wait, were you in Minnesota then?
Yeah, I was in the cities.
Oh, this guy's
I
gonna
was in
tell me
Brooklyn
about
Center.
the Halloween blizzard.
Yeah. So my mom was
It's
like,
a Minnesota rite of passage. Everyone who has been through it tells you about it. I did not know you were that Minnesotan, dude.
Yes, I was. We, my mom's like, fine, just throw on every coat and hat you have, and so we just went as North Pole explorers. And I burned into my brain. We were going from one house to the next. I remember this poor girl was in some kind of Jasmine. Aladdin wasn't out yet, but it was like Jasmine with like the loose flowy
like the
poofy pants, and I'm like, she's gonna get frostbite. But we managed to actually get out and trick or treat that winter. That was fun.
And it's totally a thing you can incorporate into winter nights. Just it just change your thinking, right? Winter nights is a very reflective holy tide. I find it's a reflection on life. It's a reflection on death. It's a reflection on what remains after we die. The memories of people after we die. And I think I maybe this is just the Scandinavian in me, but I can make existential angst out of just about anything. And looking at Halloween, looking at the kids like, those kids are going to get old. Those kids are one day not going to come back to this house. One day they will have kids of their own who will, just got a melancholy look out the window like, But yeah, that's
gotta get your cup of coffee.
Yeah,
black,
coffee,
of course.
One of the things we had wanted to talk about, one of the topics we wanted to talk about was big news, everyone, in heathenry. It was something that came across one of our blogs, was that a very influential figure in heathenry, especially Anglo-Saxon heathenry, Bob Sass, made a public blog post saying he is leaving public heathenry. Now, most people who know about Bob Sass know he had a lot of influence on Anglo-Saxon heathenry, especially outside of Theism or Theodish belief. Bob Sass is a big figure and a big teacher for a lot of them. So, and a lot of his work went on to inspire a lot of that stuff. So, it always interests me when you have someone like that, of that stature, of that caliber, or of that influence, who says, I can't with you people anymore.
I mean, this is kind of, it's a loose analogy, but it's kind of like Dave Filoni leaving Star Wars. I mean, big influence.
That is a deep cut.
We got nerds in here. I mean, somebody will get it.
Some nerds up in here who know what Carl's talking about.
So
yeah,
Filoni's the guy who brought us The Mandalorian. So it's like big influence on that part of Star Wars, but not, he's not George Lucas, but he's very influential in terms of the story that they're crafting. So kind of similar.
He's an influential guy, especially in certain circles.
Yeah, exactly.
Like with a certain flavor of heathenry. And I don't want to drag I'm not going to drag Bob. He's got to do what he's got to do. But I was interested to see, like, why is this public person, this very influential guy, why has he had enough? And one of the things that I saw was this. And I want to be charitable, right? Because I don't want to drag anybody. I want to be charitable. Here's this almost a complete absence of wealthy individuals. Most heathens are below the average income. This one was a hard one for me to parse, Carl, and I think you and I were talking back and forth before about what it exactly means to not have wealthy people, or have a lot of wealthy people in our faith. Because I think what he's saying is, I think he's making a true statement that there's not a.
As far as I know, Bezos or Zuckerberg isn't planning on converting anytime soon. So
right, he's correct. I think he's correct in his statement. I don't know a heck of a lot of wealthy heathens, but what does it mean to not have? And I think this is what you and I were talking about. What does it mean to not have wealth in a faith? What does it mean to not have that? And that was a question I wanted to pose to you. What does it mean when you don't have that kind of stuff?
Well, I think, and this, you know, bouncing kind of off our pre-show conversation, the it's interesting that we keep using the word wealth as
Mm,
opposed to simply assets
mm,
or funding or even money. Um, there's one of the main points of the argument for reparations is, in fact, that there has been a significant loss of generational wealth. There hasn't there's been active systemic and institutional efforts to prevent um, the inheritance and growth of wealth through minorities. And I'm not trying to steal any of that or take away from their points, but when you talk about there are no wealthy heathens, there's not even any wealthy heathen organizations. We haven't been around long enough to even generate the kind of wealth that we see in even other newer religions. Not newer than us, but when I say newer, I mean like within the last couple hundred years. I mean,
mm-hmm.
even something like Mormonism, even though it's an
Yeah.
offshoot of Christianity, it's been around a couple centuries, a couple generations, and
And
it
Bob
has,
specifically cites Scientology
yeah,
as an example, and I think that's astute example
yep,
of a faith
exactly.
that's able to collect a lot of wealth.
And there's also with something like Scientology or even um, Christianity or any of its variants, there is baked into, and it's not a judgmental statement, but it is, it's baked into their practice that whatever collective group that you are associating with, they get part of your money. They get the tithe. And in heathenry, we don't,
Mhm.
obviously. But there's also something to be said for the fact that heathenry has been so fractured for so much of its history that having an org that you can even trust enough to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, outside of just the annual dues to the Troth, since I became a member, it's been a bit of a sticky wicket to try to figure out, how much is and what good would that do, and the Troth is doing a much better job, I think, of organizing itself with this new restructuring we're doing, like trying to spin Red Hammer up to actually start coordinating efforts and getting things done. So the fact that we're complaining about not having any wealthy heathens, and we talked about the lack of uh, property. We don't
Hmm.
have a Hoff, but the thing about that religious generational wealth that you see, if we're trying to keep up with the Reverend Johnson, um, like you said earlier, that these churches and other religious institutions, they bought their buildings way back, and they have established. I mean, there's a reason churches survive better than pretty much any other building in most of Western society. And when you look for the oldest building in town, it's probably going to be a place of worship, which, you know, again, we haven't been around long enough for anything like that. And so trying to compare them isn't even apples and oranges. It's apples and plows. It's just, they're tangentially related. You'll find both on a farm, but you can eat one but not the other. It doesn't even work.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Carl. On this, the phrase that keeps popping into my mind when you're saying that is you can't have institutional wealth without institutions, and
Exactly
and
that. Yeah.
heathenry ain't got institutions,
No.
and that's the thing that strikes me about Bob's essay. One of the things that strikes me about it is just and I don't want to put words in his mouth again, being trying to be charitable as possible to Bob. Again, this couldn't have been easy to write. But if I had to put my finger on, okay, here's the problem that he's citing, that he's not quite putting his finger on, is the lack of actual institutions in heathenry. As you know, as we are part of the general neo-pagan milieu, we are inherently, I think, distrustful of institutions. Right?
Yeah,
Like
and
we
there's
don't. We came from a religious institution, usually in a church, and we don't like that institution. We didn't like the institution
baggage,
of it,
trauma, etc. There's a
the
lot of
baggage,
that.
the trauma, and so we think that, well, we need to avoid having institutions. We need to avoid those getting built up, those power
Yeah.
structures, those hierarchies,
Fool
those
me once.
yeah, fool me once. Exactly. Fool me once. Fool me twice. You can't get fooled again. To quote the philosopher George Bush.
It's just being recordified.
The internet. And when I think about that, and I think about what he's saying with the wealth, why? And when I say we don't have any hoofs, I mean the Troth as an organization does not own any hoofs. But there are private hoofs and temples. Even just last year, there's a guy who bought a property and that he's going to develop into a hoof or a temple complex of some kind. There's a guy in Canada who bought a property. There's a guy in Maryland who bought a property and turned it into that. There's a guy in New Mexico, gambling in, bought a property in the middle of nowhere and built a temple there. There are temples all over the country, but they're all privately owned.
Yeah,
Because
and
we don't have any institutions or organizations that can turn around and buy those back.
well, buy them back and make use of them.
Right.
I mean, really, like my dream for the Troth in 50, 100 years, when we actually have our feet underneath us and we are fully an institution, is that
50 to 100 years, guys, mark it down.
Yeah, somewhere in there, is that we have instead of Hoffs, we have, as an organization, actually bought some of these campgrounds. And so instead of trying to guess where the next Troth moot's going to be, we have 4 or 5 scattered across the country, and we just hit them in order.
Yeah.
And, we use them off season for whatever else we need to, because something you and I mentioned in the pre-show is that we don't, not even just speaking for the Troth, but in terms of paganism, we don't have the population density necessary to maintain a physical property on the level of a Hoth or a temple, to equivalent to a church or a synagogue or a mosque. Those have turnover.
Yeah.
I mean, even the most successful ones, even the mega churches with thousands of members every day, have turnover. They have churn. We don't have enough population density. If you have a dozen folks trying to help put together a Hof, if one person leaves due to interpersonal conflict and 2 others follow out of solidarity, you have just cut your entire group by a third, and good luck finding somebody else to fill those shoes.
Yeah. And here's a nice comment here that thank you, Amber, for the comment. Seems to be the point to be made in comparison to other pagan sectors. It just isn't the organizational structure and the size worldwide to complete projects of wealth, right? To complete those kinds of things that and to sustain them.
Yeah.
On top of that,
I mean, you got to pay property tax. You got to pay upkeep. You got to keep that building
not to pay
up to
property
code.
tax if it's a church.
Well, that okay, we got to pay the lawyer to actually get the local county to recognize us as a church, because we're they're pagans. I don't know if that actually counts in down here,
maybe not in Alabama, but you still have to pay bills, right? You still have to pay and not everything can be run just by volunteers, right?
No.
At some point you may actually have to pay someone to cut the grass. You may have to pay someone to keep up maintenance, right? You may
Exactly.
need to hire a facilities person. So yeah, it's an expensive proposition to maintain, and you need a community who can continue to maintain that.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's
or
hard enough
if
maintaining our cyberspace. Just
yeah,
the Troth website. We had to do a whole rebuild of the dang thing. I mean, that was
mm-hmm.
basically like taking it down to the studs
Yes,
for a temple or a building, is what we
mm-hmm.
had to do,
Yeah,
and
it
that wasn't
was
cheap.
no, it was not. No, it
Worth
was
it,
not worth
absolutely worth it.
absolutely worth
But
every dime. Worth every dime we spent, and a lot of volunteer hours went into it too. Um,
absolutely,
but we the another thing that I think about it is the institution of the church providing for churches that don't get a lot of money. So, for example, this is the
they
reason
have
why
their
you
own
can have a church
socialism.
out in the middle of nowhere sometimes is because you have a main organization that's funding it. That's,
Hmm.
you're not just paying for your church necessarily when you're giving. You're paying for all of them.
Yeah,
You're paying for a church where there's 5 people that go. Um, Sometimes, and
yep,
especially nowadays with the collapse of many Christian denominations, is this demographic collapse that they're experiencing, where people are just leaving,
yep,
either for more charismatic sects of Christianity, or just leaving the church entirely.
exactly.
Um, you know, that's how you end up with abandoned churches and for sale properties. But that's a criticism that maybe is buried somewhere in Bob's thought. I hope I'm interpreting this correctly.
Yeah, I
I
don't
hope we're
I don't
being
even know
charitable
if that's a
here.
criticism or just a frustration with the current state of affairs. Really, I
Yeah,
mean, it. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Every time I drive past a church that has like 5 acres in the middle of town, that's probably multi-million-dollar property, and it's like, man, that would be so awesome to have just
I
one equivalent.
I walk
But
by a Scientology headquarters in my downtown area in St. Paul. There is a huge Scientology complex down there.
yeah,
I am just like, why not me?
exactly.
Yeah, for sure. And here's a Daniel actually has another good point here that I'll say. I think another difficulty is how spread we are, right?
Yeah,
You were talking about density before compared to Christianity, and we don't aggressively find people to convert to build numbers and thus income. Yeah, we do not, and I don't think we're going to be changing that approach anytime soon to one of conversion. There's nothing in it for us for
well,
as far as convert. We're not saving anybody's soul here, so it's
yeah.
not.
Well, I mean,
It's just not part
we're
of our
not
theology.
converting so hard that we're not even like, in a lot of cases, we're not even doing inter-pagan outreach. Like,
Do you find
they're a
yourself just
big.
going like, "Stay away"? So you
Yeah,
don't
I
see
mean,
it?
really, it's not even just. It's like I said earlier. You have a group of 12, and one person leaves because due to interpersonal, and you get two or three
Yeah,
others that follow to solidarity. It's not like the leader of that group or even that group in general goes then to the local greater pagan community and is like, anybody else want to come hang out with us? Like, that just doesn't happen.
no, no, and I almost feel
No,
sometimes
usually
like,
it just collapses harder on itself.
yeah, and I almost feel sometimes like I don't know if anybody saw this movie ever, Walk Hard, with Dewey Cox, and
Maybe once.
he's talking like this character who's like doing drugs, and he's like, Dewey, you do not want to do this. And he's like giving him all the reasons, like, marijuana makes you feel so great. You do not want this, Dewey. And I almost feel like sometimes I'm like, yeah, we have such great community here. You do not want this, though. You do not want to come into
Nope. None of
this.
this. Back off. You don't
No,
want
you don't
this.
want it. You do not want it.
No.
Yeah, I find myself sometimes, you almost feel like we're warning people away, more than we're welcoming them in.
Yeah.
But I think we were pretty welcoming at Parliament of World Religions
Oh, yeah.
last
Yeah.
year. We went to
Um,
Parliament of World. Carl was my bench buddy at Parliament, which was a great time. And I think, um, I think Bob, actually makes a really, and I wanted to hit on this point, because it is very important, and I think it's probably the most important sentence in this whole thing. Um, is if religion doesn't cause people to be better people and to have the highest ethical standards, then it is worthless. Um, just to be, again, a principle of charity, I actually think that that's the core, maybe the core for it, because he highlights it
Mm-hmm.
in the article. So it seems to me like he's really highlighting this, and it, I have seen it in heathenry where it people don't get any better as people.
No, there's
Um,
a lot of. I came here to find. I came here to find a reason for why I believe the way I do, and I have
mhm,
found it, and so I shall continue to believe the way I do.
right, right.
There's not a whole lot of introspection that is done. I think
Yeah,
when someone moves into a heathen space.
yes, and I think Bob's hitting on something also that's difficult. Is that it's hard to have a conversation about ethics at all when it seems like most of what we want to say is no, not that, or no, not that,
Yeah.
or no, not that. You know, when someone
Yeah.
comes up, someone hits you with the nine noble virtues, right? Which
Yeah.
the holy and sacred nine noble virtues, or the Assyrian code of nine, and the most we can say, right? The most we can say back is often just no, not that,
Yeah.
and it
Like
leaves
I see
one
why
wondering.
you wanted
Yeah,
it. I mean,
yeah.
on
When we,
the on the surface, it's okay, but the
yeah,
moment you start scratching at it,
yes, and then you
not
say,
that.
but then what?
But then what?
Okay,
Exactly.
if not that, but so then what?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what I'm choosing to read into choosing to
Yeah.
read into
Well, I
Bob,
mean,
since is
we're
this
we're using
ideas of,
Bob as a springboard lesson.
yes,
I
just
mean, this is
using,
the conversation we want to have because someone comes into heathenry, like um, like someone walks into a kitchen and says, I want to make a meal. It's like, okay, well, grab some tools, and they
mhm,
go and grab a teaspoon. It's like, no, not that. Um, you know, it's and then they go and grab a coffee grinder. It's like, no, not that. And it's like, okay, well, what do you need to grab? It's like, we need to have those pots, pans, a recipe book,
yes,
something. We need something to
yes,
give people just a direction.
even
Whether
if
you
they
want to
want to
make a
disagree.
fettuccine Alfredo or bran muffins,
Yeah,
you can make whatever you want in the kitchen, but we need to have some ability to say, here's what you need to move in the direction you want to.
even just to start the conversation, even if someone wants to disagree with everything you're saying, it even comes back to that holy and perfect apostolic Troth calendar. Um, I can never say it without laughing, but it goes, even if you want to disagree, at least I'm saying something you can react to rather than just no.
Yeah.
Right, if I say to someone, well, look, I think the basis of our faith is in generosity, hospitality, kindness, and compassion. That is what I understand to be the, and benevolence. That is what I understand the core of heathenry to be. If someone wants to react to that and say, no, I don't think that, I'm fine with
Well,
that.
how do you say kindness when Odin tells me not to leave the house unless I'm strapped?
Yeah, that's another show. That's another show. Airing
But
all times.
it's a discussion.
Blap blap.
It's a
Yeah,
discussion.
at least it's a discussion.
Where do you pull the kindness from if you are looking at the lore?
Yes, right.
You
And you
know?
can actually have a conversation as to examples of kindness, which are plentiful if you know where to look. Um, and examples of generosity, forgiveness, you can find that there. I think of another thing that Bob's essay reminded me of was Swain's uh, love note to Heathenry when letting go
It's not
to
me,
live
it's
with
you.
Christ. Yeah, right. It's not me, it's you. But letting go to live with Christ, where he said, like, I found a religion with no compassion. You know, I'd spent so much of my time, my life, my energy. And I know some of us, especially those of us who work in volunteer nonprofits can feel like you're giving so much of yourself to a project, and then to feel like he felt, which was, there was no forgiveness. Like, I made a mistake, and so he says, like, I made a mistake, and we're not going to go into what mistake he made. But when he said, like, I made a mistake and there was no forgiveness for me, there was nothing. There was just
Yeah.
brutal rejection of me, and throwing me out. And the only thing I could think of when I read that was, right, that was you were hugely influential on making it
I
that
mean,
way.
if you're gonna be a fire and brimstone preacher, don't be surprised when your congregation throws you into hell.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
and you fall
you
from
have
grace, and there's
yeah.
no grace. You tell people there's no grace for anybody, fire and brimstone for anybody who makes an error, and there's no
I mean,
grace for you.
the moment you make a mistake, you have corrupted the weird of the group,
Mm-hmm.
and you are now outlawed.
Yes.
I mean, if that's what you tell people,
Yes.
that's what they're going to hold you to.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that rolls back into our discussion and our problem of, what kind of cookbook are we going to offer these folks in the kitchen, because you can take the lore in whatever direction you want.
Yes. Yes. There was a person in chat a couple weeks ago was asking us questions about the historical lore, and I remember, like, just throwing my hands up at some point, like, look, you can make the lore say just about what, like, you there are so many creative and interesting ways to look at the lore. For me, there's no one way, one true interpretation. And I think there are some YouTubers and personalities who actually get this and understand, like, that it's a text that's meant to be engaged with
Mm-hmm.
and interpreted critically. And if anyone wants to learn how to do that, we have a lore course available for to be able to think critically about the lore. Um, but to be able to engage with the text like that and pull out interesting insights, like, I don't ask that people be right when it comes to the lore. I ask that your take be at least interesting, right?
Yeah,
Interesting
I
enough to
mean,
engage with, and that
we
shows me you've really sat and thought about it.
yeah, what we I mean, for me at least, I can't speak for the org and as a whole in this, but I would prefer the Jewish approach to the text as opposed to a fundamentalist Christian one. It is not the uh, inerrant word of a deity. It is something to be ripped apart, take down, glued back together,
Yeah.
and rinse and repeat until you can come to an agreement about which word starts it, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can have an argument.
Yeah.
It's
Or yeah, and I think this brings us back. This brings me back to Parliament of World Religions, and one of the panels that I got to attend, which was about, actually, there was something really awesome about, but there was something really awesome that I learned there, which was about the Jewish tradition of the Talmud, the this notion that we are all engaged, we're engaging with this text, and they're engaging with this text, and our argument today is an extension of what is happening back then. So like, it's like me and David, we're having an argument today that's based on the argument that was had in 1920. That was based on an argument that was had in 1830. That was based, and you can trace the argument all the way back to this passage. It just showing these generations of struggle, and they mention this struggle with the text, and that's what I appreciate, that the Jewish interpretation of, like, the struggle with the text, rather than trying to simply say the
certainty.
text says this is what it says, and not realizing the irony of removing yourself from it, because you're not, right. You are still present. You are the interpreter. Now, we
That's
do
that.
have a shortened show today. I do want to make everyone know, probably about 10-15 minutes remaining. I am really enjoying my conversation with Carl. We should do this more often, Carl.
We should,
Come
yeah.
on. Just call me. Just be dudes.
Yeah, yeah.
Play some games. Um, so, just thinking again about engaging with the text, and I think that was something that Bob Sass was actually mentions here about, like, going to like being too hard. I wouldn't say being too harsh, but like he mentions in his mistakes, like he talks about mistakes I've made, which I appreciate when someone's able to uh, reflect. Um, but when he was talking about, there were many times I argued too long and too passionately for historical practices. I once gave a long angry rant on the Chicago Pagan Pride page that I deeply regret. Um, you know, there's a lot to be said for that, right? Like when you get caught up in the, you miss the forest for the trees, I guess, when we think about why we're arguing in the first place, when we miss out on that. I don't know, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we I feel like and this is something that's just kind of like coalescing in my skull as we're having this discussion here. We especially in online spaces, which is where most of these discussions happen these days, back and forth. It's really, I mean, okay, let me see, I put this into words. We are talking about a culture that, even for all of the historical accuracy that Viking was a job and it was not a very common one, most were farmers, administrators, etc., so on and so forth. It was a combative approach and worldview, and not necessarily even against your fellow person, but against nature, against fate, whatever, what have you. When you're doing this combative approach, and you don't get that in your job these days, unless you are very fortunate, and or you're an MMA fighter or something.
Yeah.
But most of us, if we want that kind of interaction, then we go to Facebook and argue in the com boxes, and that's what we get. And so this has kind of, I think, created a and fed by Western imperialism, this desire to win, this desire to come out on top, this combative approach, that the only outcome acceptable is that there is a clear winner and a clear loser. And so when we approach these arguments most of the time, and so many times we're approaching it out of ignorance for the context. You see a blog post, and that person has said their piece, and then you get a paragraph, or you get a comment on Facebook, and for all of our talk about a lack of density in meat space, in the real world, and
Yeah.
geographically, cyber online, we are very dense.
Mm-hmm.
And you are going to encounter so many different people and so many different points that you're inevitably going to cross somebody who is so counter to your own that it's going to feel like a physical assault,
Yeah.
philosophically, academically, or even religiously.
Yeah.
And so you are going to then, and you are going
Right.
to want to win.
Right.
The idea of approaching this argument, this discussion, as approaching another human being and attempting, you don't even have to come to an understanding. You don't have to come to a true negotiation where, a successful negotiation leaves both sides wanting more.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to even come to that. But the ability, I think, has been lost for the most part to come to this discussion, to come to these views that are so counter to our own, and have a discussion to, what's that phrase, hold a point, hold a perspective in our mind fully, without actually believing in it,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
You can, we need to have the ability. We need to regain it. We need to find it, because I think honestly that was something that ideally, kids are going to bed. Sorry, all background noise. I think that's something that, in the idealized historical perspective of like the Greek Forum, we need that again. We need the ability to come together and philosophically, intellectually come to blows, but then go out for drinks after, and both gain something from it, but no one has to win. No one has to come out on top.
Right. And this is gets back to our conversation about. I love what you're saying here, because it's when we think about these kinds of conversations, these kinds of confrontations, which happen. It can't be about me winning or you winning or me conquering this other person, but both of us striving towards the truth, right? Both of us in service to the truth. And this is another awesome thing that I got from the Parliament panel that I can't remember what it was actually about, but it was talking about like the difference between holy debate and not holy debate. And holy debate is when two people are honestly engaged with a topic and want to figure out the truth. An unholy debate is when one party wants to destroy the other party utterly, and just conquer them and destroy them.
I mean, drop a sick meme and own them in the comments and walk away. It's like, what have you really gained? Exactly. I mean, I'm as guilty as the next guy of doing that. I do it all the time. I did it 2 days ago and I got blocked, and I'm like, did he delete the post? And they're like, no, he just deleted you. It's like, okay, fine.
Yes.
But for heathenry, for this religion that we're trying to build, for this institution that one day hopefully will collect and pass on the wealth, even if that is simply intellectual, philosophical wealth that we have garnered through this process. We have to change our approach with these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, and understanding that even people we disagree with vehemently sometimes
can teach us something.
They can teach us something. And they also it's still part of the conversation about the faith. Like I've never particularly agreed with Bob about anything, and I'm not going to endorse his work. Retweets are not endorsements, but I said at the beginning when we were talking about this that he's hugely influential, and some of the practice that I now do is an answer to a challenge that was issued by either someone who was influenced by his work or his work directly. I don't necessarily have to celebrate the guy, and I don't necessarily have to follow his work, but I have to admit that like part of the reason I do what I do is because of the challenge that was issued that I had to confront by confronting his work. And the better the work, I'd say, I'd hope that we evolve better work as heathens, as thinkers, to challenge one another to be better. And this is getting back to you, Bob, about being better people. That we produce the kind of work that inspires people to have those kinds, that challenges people to be better. Because if we're constantly saying no, well, not that,
yeah,
we're not really challenging anybody.
Yeah, like we said a second ago, the somebody comes in and they find the reasons for why they believe what they believe, and then they are content with that. We need to have the challenges ready to unsettle them. It's like, okay, you believe this, but what about this? Why? And what about this little avenue down here that comes off of that? Have you thought about this?
Mm-hmm.
We want to welcome them in the front door, but we don't want their seat to be so comfortable that they fall asleep.
Mm-hmm. And also to think about why we do the things why we do things the way we do them.
Exactly.
You can pick up the one holy apostolic Troth calendar, and go off that. But you could read one of I'm just going to cite it, one of Bob's old articles on Yule, and go, well, why do you do it that way? This guy says it's different, right? This guy says that's not correct at all, and here's his sourcing, and now you get to have the conversation.
Exactly
Now
that.
you actually get to have the conversation about not only why it is, but why does it matter, right? Why does it matter when, and if the truth is it doesn't, then okay, that's one thing. But if the truth is that it does, then how do we negotiate this? How do we come up with this tradition now, um, based on these challenges and these conversations we're having?
Yeah, and that kind of bounces off the recent article in the Wild Hunt by another certain individual who has also been
Yes.
relatively influential.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Quite.
the idea that we have these conversations, that we have these challenges, that we have these why do you do it this way when someone else says this, when we can all point at the lore and say,
Mm-hmm.
yea, verily, this is why I do the thing. We are building that new tradition. We, even the Reconstructionists aren't building ships on the Scandinavian coastline. I mean, I used to make the joke, how Reconstructionists do we truly want to get? How many intestinal worms do you have? Uh, we are not back then, and this world is not that world. Um, and this is just my personal opinion. When this kind of topic comes up, to believe that the gods just kind of stopped
Mm-hmm.
and have not even at least been observing the course of human history in the meantime, since the how did Bob put it? Since heathenry was crushed, all caps, by Christianity, I think does a disservice
Mm-hmm.
to both the entire worldview and philosophy, even if you approach it from a deific perspective. To believe it just kind of went into stasis,
Yeah.
it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You're square peg round holing here, and
Yes.
we need to figure out what works here. We need to find. Oh, I said something rather clever the other day, and I'm going to forget it until this call ends, and then I'll be like,
You're kidding.
um,
uh,
but yeah, we need to find the. We need to clear away the rubble and find the foundation to build our new building.
yeah. We have to, and the way I once said something clever once,
We all
on
get
the Troth
one.
website one time, which was that if all the conversations you're having about your faith are conversations about history, then that's the only place your faith lives.
That's a good
That's
one.
where it is.
That's a
It's in the
damn good
past.
one.
It
Yeah.
doesn't. It's not alive now. If all we are doing is talking about what people may or may not have done or may not have believed. Like, let's say I figure out what someone in 874 Saxony believed, and I had that to the letter. All I've got is what they believe.
Yep.
To say I discover all that, I spend my whole life reconstructing this, and then all I've got is just
Well,
what they believed.
the doctor shows
I
up
have
in a blue
no
box
idea
and
what I
hands you a
believe.
stack of papers and says, "Here's exactly what it was." And it's like, doesn't do me any
It's
good. And
yeah,
you
handed
know,
me a diary saying this is exactly what I believe. Then if I found that, it's what do I believe? Do I just point to this and say this exactly, even if I've never, I think that that's the challenge that we face, and you're nailing it with this analogy of building. Where do we find this new home? Where do we build this new home, this new church, this new temple, this new
I
hof?
mean, the timbers,
When
some
do
of
we
the
stop
structure is
digging and
still
start
there.
building?
Yeah, some of it's still there, and we're still digging through the rubble and finding, oh, here's a sconce that might have actually had some kind of, lit the way down a hallway. And sure, we can rebuild a hallway there, but does there need to be a hallway, because we don't even know what the rooms are on either side of the
Yes.
hallway?
Or do
You know,
we say it? Do we look at it and go, there needs to be a hallway here because people need to get from this room to this room? right? We don't say, well, was there a hallway here? We say, does there need to be one? Because
Exactly.
we're building it for people to use, right? Ultimately, religions exist for people to practice. And
To find their way to the truth.
if your religion doesn't exist for people, who is it there for? What's it there for? You know, if it's not making people better, what is it good for? And that's our tie-in, everybody, and that's just about us at time. Carl, it has been an absolute pleasure to have
Absolutely.
you on All Things. Maybe you'll host one of your own someday.
Oh no.
So thank you guys so much for spending your evening with us. I see
Yes.
Fabio on the chat now. We hope you found the conversation interesting. We will be here every single Friday without fail. And, and we'll be here at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you guys so much for spending your evening with us.
Hang on, wait, hang on. We've had this discussion. What is that Greenwich time?
Oh,
9 p.m. That's +5 right now, so that would be
it's like 2 in the
2.
morning.
Yeah, 2 or 3 in the morning.
It's like 2 or 3 in the morning there.
Yeah. So
thank you guys from all over the world. Thank you guys for listening. You guys have a wonderful